and welcome to a special edition of Facts and Snacks. I'm your host, Austin, and joining us today are Amy McCandless, Director of Development for the Crisis Center, Sabrina Wright Hobart, Development Coordinator for the Crisis Center, Marnie Kaminsky, Director of Development, Gateway Domestic Violence Services, and Abby Hansen, Chief Program Officer, Safe House Denver. And representing RTD today is Melissa McDowell, Manager Development and Training, and Leah Riley, Chief Administrative Officer. Today, they will be presenting on how to identify and respond to signs of domestic violence as part of Domestic Violence Awareness Month. Before we begin, I will go over some housekeeping items, followed by a safety moment. First, as the subject of today's presentation is about domestic violence, some topics will be discussed will be sensitive in nature. Next, please keep your mics muted and webcams off during the presentation. Those joining us by phone today should press *6 to mute themselves. If you have a question during the presentation, please send it via the chat box, and we will get to it in order during the Q&A session after the presentation. During the Q&A session, we will have an opportunity for those calling in to ask questions. During this time, simply press *6 if you're calling in. State your name, department, and then ask your question. Those joining live via Teams can raise their hands as well, or continue using the chat feature to ask their questions live. Lastly, this session is being recorded for future viewing. Today's safety moment is about, sorry about that. Today's safety moment is about night driving, especially as daylight saving time concludes. We're about to have shorter days, fatigue, compromised night vision, rush hour, and impaired drivers are some of the risks we will face when driving at night, especially as these days get shorter and the nights get longer. These risks become especially pronounced moving into the weekend, with fatal crashes peaking on Saturday nights, according to NHTSA data. When daylight savings time ends, many people will find themselves spending more time driving in the dark. Depth perception, color recognition, and peripheral vision can be compromised in the dark, and the glare of headlights from an oncoming vehicle can temporarily blind a driver. Night driving is dangerous because even with high beam headlights on, visibility is limited to about 500 feet, creating less time to react to something in the road, especially when driving at higher speeds. So what should you do to combat the darkness while driving? Aim your headlights correctly and make sure they're clean. Dim your dashboard. Look away from oncoming lights. If you wear glasses, make sure they're anti-reflective. Clean your windshield to eliminate streaks. And slow down to compensate for the limited visibility and reduce stopping time. Now, with all that out of the way, I will hand it over to our presenters. Take it away.
Great. Thank you for the introduction, Austin, and thank you for everybody that has joined us today. I'm Leah Riley, the Chief Administrative Officer, and just want to extend my gratitude and thanks for our special guests today. This is a new venture for RTD. We partnered with outside nonprofits to talk about this very important topic. October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and we are wanting to make sure that our employees have the resources and knowledge to handle this topic, to address any issues, and provide safe space to talk and ask questions if you'd like. So I think we can kick it off, and I believe, Amy, you're going to be up first, so I'll turn it over to you, and thank you again for being with us today.
Excellent. Thanks, Leah. Thank you guys for having us today. This is our second presentation of 3 that we're doing. And I didn't say this yesterday, but Austin, I love the little driving tips. So I feel like I learned something today too from you guys. So thank you. As Austin and Leah both said, October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month. So we are so excited to be presenting to you guys today and really hopefully giving you some high level information about what domestic violence is. We're going to go over some statistics, and then we'll get into what trauma looks like and what the cycle of violence looks like and what you guys can do should you choose to intervene, and some services that we all offer. So I am going to start on talking about high level statistics just to make sure that we are all on the same page. There's lots of stereotypes about domestic violence, lots of, I think, misconceptions about domestic violence. And so I just want to start off with some very, very basics. Domestic violence does not discriminate. Whatever you might think about domestic violence, just break that down right now, because we're going to break down all those barriers. It does not discriminate based upon race or color or even socioeconomic level. It can impact anybody. It can impact people in this room, people on this call, your coworkers, your family, your friends, your teachers, your kiddos' teachers. Anybody can be impacted by domestic violence. And these nationwide statistics show that. So each minute, 20 people are physically abused by an intimate partner. So think about the amount of time that we're on this call today, right? Let's call it 45 minutes maybe. So during that time, during every minute, 20 people are physically abused across this country. 1 in 4 women and 1 in 7 men will be impacted by domestic violence in their lifetime. So it's a little hard to tell because I don't see pictures on this call. I just see little circles with initials. But let's assume that half of the people on this call are women, and it looks like there's maybe 20 of us, let's say. So look at those statistics and think about your coworkers, the person you might be sitting next to in your cubicle or across the hall in your office. Odds are somebody that you work with or come across on a daily basis has been impacted by domestic violence. This one always gets me. I'm a mom of 2, so this one's a little bit like, whoa. 1 in 15 kids are exposed to domestic violence in their household each year. 90% of those kids are eyewitnesses to the violence. And so they are seeing dad hit mom or mom hit dad. They're seeing name calling. They're seeing pushing and shoving and control and all of the things that we know domestic violence is. 90% of these 1 in 15 kids are actually witnessing that firsthand. We're going to talk about this cycle here in a little bit. On any given day, there's more than 20,000 calls that are placed to domestic violence hotlines, just like the ones that we have at the Crisis Center and Gateway and Safe House Denver. So those calls are not only for people in crisis necessarily. People might be calling for resources or referrals or, oh my gosh, I think this might be happening. Can you help me? Kinds of calls. And we're all there to answer those phones with real life people to provide support for anybody that might be needing to reach out in any form of domestic violence. I also want to point out there, I think it says on the slide, but domestic violence does not only impact women. A lot of people think it's a, poor person's issue, it's a woman's issue, it's maybe not a white person's issue. All of those are very, very false. So our services, all of us that are on the call today, we all serve all victims of domestic violence: men, women, transgender individuals, adults, children, really that whole gamut of people that can be impacted. So oftentimes people think about domestic violence and they think about the black eye or the broken arm, right? That's instantly oftentimes when you ask somebody, oh, have you been impacted by domestic violence? Well, no, I've never been hit. I've never been pushed. But it's so much more than that, right? Domestic violence is about power and control. It isn't about anger management. I always tell people, a little relevant right now, it's not about the bad outcome of a Broncos game because your partner got upset and they didn't like how it turned out. It's about this manipulation that is based in power and control. So anger, substance abuse, bad outcome of a game, all of that can play into it and be triggers, right? But at the end of the day, it's all about the power and control that one person in an intimate relationship is putting over their partner. It's also a pattern. We're going to get into the cycle here in a little bit, but you're going to see lots of patterns that happen. It's not a one-time incident. It's not a, oh my gosh, I got so upset because XYZ happened and it was a one-time thing, right? We all have relationships that maybe aren't, sometimes the healthiest, but that doesn't mean that they're domestic violence. So we're looking for patterns of power and control. Domestic violence is also not only physical. Again, it's not only that black eye and broken arm. It can be emotional, sexual, and even financial abuse. We're going to get into that here in just a minute. So this is what's called the power and control wheel. And this is a lot of information and a lot of small words on this screen that you can read. But this will really get into the different types of violence and what perpetrators use over their partner. So things like intimidation, if we look up here at the top, using pets, using children, using threats and making themselves bigger in certain situations, right? Emotional abuse. This is the name calling, the put downs, oftentimes gaslighting. That's a term that we use a lot, where the victim is made to think that they're going crazy or they're experiencing things that are not necessarily real or based in reality, based upon the way their partner, their abusive partner, is making it seem. Isolation, this is another one that you see a lot. We'll see people move away from their family or friends. We'll see them not be able to get a job because that isolation factor means that they're not then having a support system, right? So the abusive partner is really trying to keep that other partner away from anybody else that might be able to seek help for them, reach out for safety, ask some questions even. Minimizing blaming, we all talked about this a little bit. That is really that emotional piece of, it's your fault. If you wouldn't have, I wouldn't have, right? That kind of thing. Using children, we see this a lot. You're a bad mom, you're a bad dad. Again, it goes both ways, both genders. You know, if you continue to do this, I'm going to call the cops and they're going to give me the kids and you won't get to see the kids, right? What a threat. Like, how many parents are on this call? If your partner told you that, that's terrible, right? So that is definitely a manipulation tactic, a manipulation tool that a lot of abusers use that we see very frequently. Using privilege, privilege can be financial privilege, privilege can be white privilege, privilege can be gender privilege. It's basically utilizing something that is above the other person and making them feel less than, right? And kind of using that manipulation to then pull out their power and control abuse. Economic abuse. So the Crisis Center serves Douglas County, and this is something that we see a lot in a higher affluent community that might look a little bit different in other communities. But economic abuse is going to look like things like their partner getting an allowance, right? You're given a certain amount of money. Let's say you have to go to the grocery store, right? Buy groceries for your family. You're given, say, $50. You're expected to keep track of exactly how that money is spent, exactly what you're spending it on. There's no straying from the list, so to speak, right? It's very much in control. It's very much, here's your money. This is our list. This is what we're getting. Come back home with exactly that. And that's what I expect to see. Hopefully not the way any of us are shopping, but that's a lot of the power and control and financial or economic abuse that we see a lot. So the power and control wheel goes hand in hand with the cycle of violence. And oftentimes we hear, why don't they just leave? Why don't they just get away? And Abby is going to talk more about that for us.
Great, thank you so much, Amy. Yes, so the cycle of abuse, along with the power and control wheel, are actually really old models that still ring true today. These started simply as conversations among survivors back in the early days of the domestic violence movement. Survivors would get together in each other's living rooms and notice these patterns, and the cycle of abuse really rang true for survivors across the board. And so, like I said, we still use it today when talking with survivors to help kind of illuminate some of the issues that go on and the dynamics that go on in abusive relationships. So even before the cycle of abuse begins, domestic violence relationships begin very much like any other relationship. This is a time when the abuser is showing off the most positive aspects of themselves and really setting the stage for this fairy tale relationship, and these expectations of wonderful things, safety, love, all the things that we all look for in relationships. But the thing that is different and distinct about domestic violence relationships is that it moves through the cycle and starts with this tension building phase. So this is when the survivor is starting to notice that things are shifting and that things are off, and they might be feeling like they're walking on eggshells. They're constantly shifting their own behavior to try to appease the abuser and really get back to that ideal image that was set forth in the honeymoon period. But the tension building phase will lend its way into an acute incident, so some sort of episode of abuse that happens. So this could be the physical assault, but like Amy said, there are other aspects of abuse. So it could be a verbal assault, it could be a sexual assault, some sort of peak moment when the power and control is sort of most exerted and most abusive. And this is also the place where most outsiders can name that dynamic and perhaps even recognize that as domestic violence. But what's important to know is there are other phases of the cycle that oftentimes sort of lie below the radar and aren't necessarily noticed by outsiders. So then the next two phases, the reconciliation phase and the calm phase, I always see this as part of what I call a second honeymoon. So in reconciliation, that's when the abuser might apologize, there might be excuses or sort of shifting of blame, and then it can move into a period of quiet until the tension starts building again. What I think is most critical to understand about this kind of second honeymoon is that it mirrors a lot of the dynamics that were set forth in the beginning of the relationship, but there's always a caveat, right? So it might be, I'm really, really sorry that I hurt you, but it really wasn't that bad. Or, I'm sorry, this will never happen again, but it was really your fault. And that starts that mental manipulation and gaslighting that is so pervasive in abusive relationships. So what is also of note is that for many survivors that have survived this cycle many, many, many times with their abuser, what we often see is that reconciliation and calm start to kind of fade away. And in some abusive relationships, it really can just vacillate back and forth between tension building and the incident and another tension building and another explosive abusive episode. I'm going to go to the next slide. We can transition into talking a little bit about trauma responses. So in living through this pattern of abuse and this cycle of violence, this impacts survivors in a real way, ongoing. So it's important to know that trauma responses are normal neurological responses to danger. This is part of our old brain, in early times of humans, right? Even back when the threat to early humans was that tiger maybe jumping out at the jungle at us, our brain is really wired the same. So for people who have experienced this domestic violence cycle and these patterns of abuse, it can be really hard for survivors to discern between what is an actual real threat to my safety and what is a response that I'm having because of my history of trauma. So we talk about these sort of four main categories of trauma responses. There's fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. So starting with the fight, this is really your body's way of facing perceived threats aggressively. So it's going to be that person that might appear really angry and have angry outbursts, can be kind of a bully, can be controlling themselves and have that kind of explosive behavior. These are folks that may often be misunderstood as abusers themselves, right? On face value, the behaviors look really problematic, but when we sort of look at this through a trauma lens, we understand that this is about survival. So similarly, the flight response, this is that urge to run. So if your body and brain think that, I can't overpower this danger, I'm going to run. I'm going to try to avoid. These are people that avoid through working a lot. They become workaholics. They might have a lot of anxiety and panic and obsessive compulsive kind of natures. Fidgety, difficulty sitting still. They can be perfectionistic. And then we move down to the freeze phase. So we think about that mouse being chased by a cat. And the best defense for a mouse is to play dead and hope that the cat just kind of gets bored and moves along. So this is somebody who can be numb and checked out. We call that dissociation. Somebody who's really stuck, has really difficult time making decisions, and might have some poor boundaries, withdraw, isolate. And then finally, fawn is that performative expression of trauma. So they're just trying to please and placate their abuser to get through any sort of escalation. So this is often used when all else fails. Oftentimes for survivors that have been through that cycle and been through this pattern of power and control for so long, that they take on a performative aspect. This is the people pleaser, somebody who lacks a really strong self-identity, somebody that has poor boundaries, might be overwhelmed very easily, and is maybe trying to be overly helpful. So again, this is hopefully really helpful for you all in seeing the way that trauma survivors live life in the real world. And so you might come across people that are expressing these kind of behaviors, and these behaviors, again, on face value, might look really problematic, might be challenging to kind of manage. But if you look at it from a trauma-informed lens, remembering that these are survival strategies and these are neurobiological responses to trauma. And from there, I think I'm going to pass it over to Marnie to keep moving us along.
Thank you, Abby. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how to recognize if somebody may be being abused. So we'll talk about some red flags and some warning signs. Some are pretty obvious. It's what you think of when you think of somebody that's a victim of domestic abuse. They might have bruises or, like Amy mentioned, a broken arm or something like that. But most often it's much less obvious and insidious. So more internal, is somebody that used to be very confident now presenting with, acting, lower self-esteem, or have a change in personality? Are they suddenly depressed or anxious? And some are actually more behavioral. Are they rarely seen? Is somebody rarely seen in public without their partner? Do they go along with everything that their partner says and does? Do they have to check in often, or is their partner checking in often with them? So, there's different levels of things to look for. So just know that it's not always the obvious, just things to keep in mind. A few more common warning signs that somebody is being abused is more about how they're being treated by their partner. Is the partner putting them down in front of other people? Or is somebody talking about their their partner's temper or jealousy or possessiveness, possibly? Is somebody really constantly worried about making their partner angry? Is this person being isolated, whereas they used to spend a lot of time with family and friends? Are you now noticing that they're sort of being kept away? Those are all things definitely look out for and warning signs that somebody might be a victim of abuse. So I just want to state, as an RTD employee, you are definitely not responsible to intervene if you suspect domestic violence, somebody's being abused. It's not part of your job duties or responsibilities, but if you happen to be off duty and you choose to step in, we just wanted to give you some tips of what you could do if you wanted to intervene. Obviously, you could call 911 if you suspect or see or hear anything. Simply being there to listen to somebody is a perfect way to let them know that you're there for them. Don't advise them or to what to do or how to, don't intervene physically, obviously, if you happen to step into a situation, but just sort of be there to listen. If they've obviously sustained physical injuries, you could take them to a hospital or health facility. And then finally, you can always refer them to one of the local domestic violence agencies around the Denver metro area, such as my colleagues and I presenting today. And they will absolutely have resources for anybody who happens to call in. Can we go on the next slide? Great. So these are the three agencies, myself with Gateway and the Crisis Center and Safe House. We all offer similar main programming: a 24-hour crisis hotline, emergency or extended stay care shelter, non-residential counseling or therapy, legal advocacy, and a form of community engagement and education. We all serve, how we differ is we all serve different areas of the Denver metro area. The Crisis Center is mainly focused in the 18th Judicial District, mainly Douglas County, but also includes Arapahoe, Elbert, and Lincoln counties. Gateway mainly serves the city of Aurora and Arapahoe County, but that also includes part of Adams County. And Safe House really serves the city and county of Denver. So feel free, this slide will be up for a while, and also there's a slide at the end with all of our contact information. And you don't necessarily need to be a victim of abuse to call our crisis line. If you have a friend that needs information, or you're trying to find out more information, anybody can call the crisis line. So it's just a resource for information. Thank you very much. I'm going to pass it on to Melissa to facilitate the Q&A.
So before we get to the Q&A, I just want to make sure that all employees at RTD are aware of Colorado's Healthy Families and Workplaces Act. This act provides time for you to take off in the event that you need to take care of yourself as it relates to being a victim of domestic abuse, sexual assault, or harassment. And this also applies to a family member. So whether it's yourself or your family member that you need to take care of, you are entitled to take PTO, paid time leave off, as well as sick leave if needed. And you can take this time off to seek medical attention for yourself or a family member so that you can recover from any kind of mental illness, physical illness, and injury that you may have received as a result of domestic abuse, sexual assault, or harassment, and really just to be able to take time so that you can heal. Also, you can take time off if you need to obtain services, victim services, much like the services that have been shared today. Also to obtain mental health or counseling. And you may be in a situation where you need to relocate to make sure that you and your family members are safe. So you can also take time off for that as well. And then the other reason you can take time off is so that you can seek legal counsel and services. And again, anything that is a result of being in domestic abuse, sexual assault, or harassment for yourself or for a family member. So we want to make sure that you're very aware of this information.
All right, thank you, Melissa, and thank you to all of our presenters today for the great presentation. If you have a question, drop it in chat, raise your hand. I don't think we have any callers in. Yeah, we don't have anybody calling in. So yeah, if you have a question, just pop it in chat or raise your hand and we'll get to it. In the meantime, do y'all have anything else y'all would like to add?
Thanks, Austin. As we wait for some questions, I would just say we did have a question on yesterday's call around the intersection of mental health and domestic violence. And I'm going to actually pop back to another slide. Our services here. So you can see all three of our agencies offer some version of counseling, therapy, advocacy, right? Oftentimes what we see with domestic violence, again, as Abby mentioned on that cycle, there's the instance, right? The thing that happens, but so much more of that relationship is based in mental health and abuse and trauma and what that looks like and how that plays out in future relationships, right? So I just want to kind of point that out, I guess. And if you guys are wondering on this call, as they were yesterday, that there is a lot of intersectionality between mental health and trauma and safety and domestic violence. And our work is not just that immediate shelter service in the moment. Certainly that's what we do. And certainly that's very, very important. But I would almost argue that more important is that healing that's more longer term, right? Think of it as an onion and kind of peeling back those layers, right? The safety piece is on the outside. Sure, we can get that fixed. We can do safety planning. We can kind of work through that. But it's really about getting into the root, if you will, of the onion and peeling back all of that traumatic stuff to help somebody actually truly heal and then become safe and have future safe relationships.
Great, thank you, Amy. We'll give it about a minute or so more for questions. In the meantime, if you came in late or missed any part of the presentation, for whatever reason, a recording will be uploaded to the hub, to the Facts and Snacks page as soon as tomorrow's session is over. And speaking of, we are having one more session tomorrow at 2 p.m. So please feel free to join that session as well if there's anything you may have missed in this session. So
Austin, if it's all right, I will pop in with just another comment that I shared yesterday that I thought might also be helpful today. So all three of our organizations provide confidential domestic violence support. So as Amy mentioned, this is a very frequent issue, and it's possible that somebody here today on the call is themselves experiencing abuse in their relationship or somebody within your family. And I think it's just really important for you all to know that you are welcome to reach out to any of our services and know that we, by law, cannot disclose that information to RTD, to anyone else, that you have a right to completely confidential services.
I would also add that our services are free. And I asked you guys this yesterday. Yes, yours are as well, right? Okay. Okay, perfect. I didn't want to overspeak. So all three of us offer not only confidential, but free services. We never want cost to be a barrier for somebody that needs to reach out and seek safety in any realm. So just add that piece too. And hopefully
Great,
tomorrow I will remember and not have to ask you guys that again.
Great. Thank you, Abigail. Thank you, Amy. All right. On that note, I think we'll go ahead and call it on this session then. Thank y'all so much once again for tuning in. Thank you to all of our presenters today for a fantastic presentation. And yeah, please reach out to them. Their contact information is on the screen. If you have any other questions at all, feel free to reach out to them. And if we don't see you for the next session tomorrow, we are having another Facts and Snacks session in 2 weeks at the end of the month over the fair study and equity analysis. So please feel free to tune into that one as well. Be on the lookout for invites for that next week. Thank you all so much, and we'll see you at the next one. Bye-bye.
Thank you.